Hi, my name is Lorraine Peterson and I am an educational consultant specialising in special educational needs and disability and mental health and wellbeing. This video is produced in partnership with Integrated Treatment Services, who have asked me to talk to you about supporting pupils with SEND as we move forwards after lockdown. The government were very clear that they wanted all pupils to be welcomed back into school from the 8th of March. So by the time you're watching this, you should all be settled into the new normal. Social distancing, face masks, ventilation, lateral flow testing, getting all pupils back into the classroom, assessing how much learning has been lost, if any, and planning on how you are going to support those pupils who need to recover following a year of disruptive education. This is just the tip of the iceberg in terms of the challenges to be faced over the remainder of this academic year. In this video, I am going to outline the key points from various government guidance and look at the priorities for schools, SENCOs and teachers in relation to pupils with SEND. The latest guidance from the Department for Education is very clear about their expectations, which include some pupils with SEND, whether with an AHC plan or on SEN support, will need specific help and preparation for the changes to routine, and staff should plan to meet those needs. Pupils with medical needs will also require additional support. Schools should use individual healthcare plans to help pupils receive an education in line with their peers. Specialists, therapists, clinicians and other support staff for pupils with SEND should provide interventions as usual. Schools will need to assess the ability to clean equipment used in the delivery of therapies and determine whether this equipment can withstand cleaning and disinfecting between each use before it is put back into general use. Schools are still required to provide remote education to pupils covered by the direction where their attendance would be contrary to government guidance or legislation around coronavirus. Schools should ensure that all pupils, particularly disadvantaged, SEND and vulnerable pupils, are given the support needed to make good progress. The key principles that underpin DfE advice on curriculum planning are: education is not optional. All pupils receive a high quality education that promotes their development and equips them with the knowledge and cultural capital they need to succeed in life, and the curriculum remains broad and ambitious. Schools, along with the local authority and health partners, work with families to co-produce arrangements for delivering all therapies and support that would normally be in place for children with education, health and care plans. There is also a reminder that the requirement for all schools within the 2014 Children and Families Act to use their best endeavours to secure the special educational provision called for by the pupils' special educational needs remains in place. So what does this all mean for those pupils identified as having SEND, and how can schools ensure that they are meeting those individual needs of those pupils? All pupils should be receiving a high quality education following a broad and ambitious curriculum. For those pupils who need additional support in the classroom, teachers should ensure that they have made adaptations and adjustments within their planning to enable every pupil to access the learning. Teachers need to start to plan for any loss of learning, assess their pupils to ascertain where gaps may have appeared, especially during this last lockdown. It needs to be remembered that some children have made really good progress learning remotely, and we must ensure that we celebrate this. This might be especially true for those pupils who find the school environment difficult and they have flourished working on their own. All pupils on SEN support must be receiving provision that is additional to or different from that of their non-SEN peers. That could be one-to-one support, it could be a small group intervention, or it could be additional support from an external provider, like a speech and language therapist or a tutor. All pupils with an education, health and care plan must be receiving all the provision that is set out in section F of their plan. This includes all provision that is provided by an external specialist. Throughout the last year, many pupils with an EHCP have not received their full provision, especially during lockdown. Schools need to address this by ensuring that all provision is back in place, either face-to-face or remotely. Where pupils have not been receiving their additional provision, the school, the parents, the local authority and health professionals should be working together to establish how the provision can be escalated to meet the individual needs of the pupil. It is the local authority's duty to ensure that the provision is in place. It can mean that additional support has to be provided to bridge the gaps that may have occurred. This may require an emergency EHCP review and additional support or funding from the local authority. But I hear you all say, how are we going to fund all of this, especially those schools who are already looking at deficit budgets or have overspent because of the additional costs that the pandemic has brought? There is an expectation that all schools use some of their dedicated school budget to offer day-to-day support for pupils with SEND. The school also has their notional SEN budget that should be being used to offer the additional and/or different provision. If pupils have not been receiving this additional support, then schools should have some of that notional funding available to support them over the next few months. There is an expectation that schools use this budget to support those with additional needs now, not in the future. Many pupils will have an education, health and care plan, which will also have additional funding, top-up funding, to meet the provision laid out in section F of the plan. Again, if the provision has not been offered, then the funding should still be available. For example, a school that receives top-up funding to provide a pupil with weekly speech and language therapy, but this has not taken place throughout lockdown, should still have that funding, and that should be available, so in the short term they could offer additional therapy for that pupil. If a school and external specialists have continued to offer all the additional provisions set out in the plan, and through observations and assessment it is felt the pupil is in need of additional support, then the school should discuss this with the local authority. As I have already stated, this may require an emergency education, health and care plan review. On top of the school budget, there are also some specific pots of funding that can be used to support our SEND pupils. Firstly, we could use pupil premium. This is the funding all schools receive to support their disadvantaged pupils, those eligible for free school meals. About 30% of all disadvantaged children are also on SEN support or have an education, health and care plan. So it is possible that pupil premium could be used to support these pupils, especially if the gap has widened between them and their non-SEN peers. It is possible that not all pupil premium has been spent this year, given lockdown and school closure for many pupils. I am fully aware, however, that many of our vulnerable pupils have been in school, and some of this funding may have been spent on providing additional staffing in schools to allow other staff to offer remote learning to those at home. Catch-up premium. Last year, the government announced their one-off payment of catch-up premium to help and fund specific activities to support their pupils to catch up for lost teaching over the previous months. Schools were given the flexibility to spend their funding in the best way for their cohorts and circumstances. Schools have already received the first 2 tranches of this money, with the final tranche coming in the summer term. In mainstream schools, this will total £80 per pupil from reception through to year 11, and in special schools, alternative provision and hospital schools, this will be £240 per place. I know this is not a huge sum of money, but it has been allocated for a specific purpose. Primary schools will also receive primary PE and sports premium. This premium for all primary schools is to ensure that all pupils have a positive experience of sport and physical activity in order to live healthy and active lives. Many schools were able to carry forward some of their underspend last year because of the difficulty spending all their allocations due to the restrictions placed on physical activity during the pandemic. Many children have not been able to access sport and physical activity during the periods of lockdown, but many will also have had difficulties with their mental health as well. Schools might like to consider spending some of this funding engaging mentors or counsellors to support a pupil's mental health at the same time as engaging sports coaches to support their physical development. It also has to be remembered that there is an expectation that all schools report on their school website how pupil premium, catch-up premium and PE and sports premium are planned to be spent, how they have been spent, how you will assess the effectiveness of the spend and the impact of that spending. Using any of these additional pots of funding to support pupils recover from the last year will be an effective use of this money. Earlier this year, the Prime Minister announced a new one-off recovery premium for state primary and secondary schools, building on the pupil premium. It will be provided to schools to use as they see best to support their disadvantaged pupils. This will be approximately £6,000 per primary school and £22,000 for secondary schools. Many secondary schools are being urged to offer summer schools to support the most disadvantaged pupils to recover from the last year. Schools need to consider what these summer schools might offer, including therapies, mental health and wellbeing support and physical activity. Getting this group of pupils ready for learning should be a key priority. I would be the first to admit that there is never enough money in the educational pot. But at this moment in time, we have got what we have got and we need to use it as wisely and effectively as we can to support our most vulnerable and disadvantaged pupils. Within a school, different people will have different responsibilities around the effective use of all these different funds. Now would be a really good time to work together to ensure that we know exactly who the pupils are that need targeted and additional support and which aspects of funding we can use to make this happen. We then need to think outside the box in terms of what we might offer as additional provision, who will provide it, and then measuring the impact to show how effectively the funding has been spent. My final thoughts are, please use any of the additional funding in the most effective way to meet the needs of as many pupils as possible. Please consider the needs of all pupils, not just about academic recovery, but maybe support for communication, language development, vocabulary skills, social and emotional development, as well as physical development. Please look to invest in things that are sustainable in the long term. If you find something works really well, then you need to keep it going. Please use research and evidence to make your decisions on the most effective ways to support pupils. And please think outside the box in terms of engaging with other professionals, including those from health. We know that schools are centres of educational excellence, but many of our SEND, vulnerable and disadvantaged pupils need support from health and social care professionals as well. My name is Lorraine Peterson. I am an educational consultant specialising in special educational needs and disability and mental health and wellbeing. If you would like more information about integrated treatment services, please visit their website at www.integratedtreatmentservices.co.uk. Thank you very much for listening.